Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Fire Up Wisconsin. I don't know if I'm a cheesehead from the Motor City, but I've been around the cheesehead state lots of times, covering Brewers games, Packers games, Bucks games, you name it. I've done it. So with that said, we have a great show tonight. Hope you can stay with us for the entire time. And what a show I've been looking forward to doing for a while. We want to welcome our special guest, Sal Bando Jr. Welcome to the big show, Sal.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
You're my pleasure. All right, George Eichhorn, double duty.
Good to be here, Scott, and great to be on with Sal as well. Thank you.
And Eric Katz.
Thank you, Scott. Glad to be here.
Jeremy B. This will be his last show in the state of Michigan before he goes out to Oklahoma, right? Tulsa, that is?
Yep. Still won't be anything other than a Lions fan.
Right, former home of the Tulsa Shock. Long gone.
Good, Scott. Good, Scott.
Yeah, I remember that. I know my Tulsa history there. And last but not least, Candy Ebling, who is actually, whether people realize it or not, she was born in Indiana and only lived there for about a year and a half, but she'd been in Wisconsin the whole time. Hey, got to stick it to a Hoosier. Somewhat.
Not a Hoosier. I'm a Wisconsinite through and through.
She was born a Hoosier, but it was a short stay. But no, she's a Wisconsin girl through and through between. So here's what we're going to do tonight, folks. I got about 5 questions to ask Sal, and then the crew's going to take over, and they're going to ask Sal whatever they want to go. All right. So I hope everybody can join us. But before we do so, Candy, why don't you give everybody an introduction about our platform?
So if you see the red subscribe button in the lower right corner, please click it, subscribe, like, share our broadcast. If you like to listen to broadcast on podcast, we are on iHeartRadio, Google, Apple, wherever you get your podcast. And we're striving for 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. If you'd like to comment, if you want to send us an idea and you want to be on a show, send the topic ideas to southfloridatribune@gmail.com. If you want to advertise or sponsor a show, call Scott 954-304-4941. We broadcast live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Hope you enjoy this episode of Fire Up Wisconsin.
And also, I obviously, as Candy mentioned where they are, Twitter as well. If you want to follow me on Twitter, do so at Tribune South. South Florida Tribune has a Twitter account. For that matter, Motor City Tribune is also on there. So we have a backup account as well. So with that said, all right, Sal, let's get to business here. Let's talk about the best memories of your dad playing with the Oakland A's and the Milwaukee Brewers as a child.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start by just thanking you for the opportunity to talk about my dad.
You're welcome.
As a man, as a man and as a player, he didn't play for the limelight or the fame, and he actually shied away from it. So this, him talking about himself is something that he just didn't do. And when he passed away January 20th, and my brothers and my mom and I, we all were blown away at the response and reception that he received with his passing. And we were just very humbled by it. But we've all, in our own way, welcomed the opportunity to talk about him, since he never talked about himself. And we make every effort to share with folks who he was off the field. More than anything. I know that doesn't answer the question, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk about someone that I admired, loved, and idolized.
I'm sure he's really proud of you because you're staying in baseball. We'll get to that shortly. I should point out, though, Candy has a photo of her and your dad. So, yeah, she's very proud of when she
nice.
told me. So yeah, she was really proud of it when she brought it. So no, Sal, you're gonna answer the way the questions, the way they come from you. I don't think there's no right or wrong answer to do it. It is
Okay.
what it is.
Okay.
But whatever you're telling us is more than we knew in the first place, so you don't have to worry about that. So.
Yeah.
And
So I
Sal,
was
the picture of me and your dad was actually not on the field. He was actually playing in, I don't know if you remember, the Vince Lombardi Golf Classic that they would do.
Yes.
And he
that
was
that
out
was
there.
an event he did every year. Yeah.
I was a volunteer out there. We volunteered at one of the concession stands. It used to be run by the teachers, and my dad was a teacher when he wasn't ushering at the Brewer Stadium. And so I had a picture taken with your dad and me at the golf classic.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was born in 1970, and we moved to Milwaukee. What was it, 76, 77? So I was very young during his Oakland days, which would have been his prime. I was 2, 3, and 4 years old, so I was just a little guy when he won those 3 consecutive world championships. So although I don't have much memory of that era, I feel like I know it well just from scrapbooks and stories and, admiring and idolizing as a fan, the guys that played back then. Reggie Jackson was my favorite player, Mr. October, and him being a college teammate and a teammate of Sal's in Oakland, was pretty cool. So when I got to meet him, my jaw dropped. But one thing I'll never forget, meeting somebody that I idolized, Mr. October, was he looked at me and he said, your dad is a great man. And for a young, impressionable baseball fan, that it certainly got my attention, because he was just my dad, right? I idolize left-handed hitters and guys that hit a lot of home runs like Reggie. So it kind of floored me, and as I got older, I appreciated it more. One funny story though that and we have photos to prove this, was when they won the first World Series in 1972. I think there's a picture of my mom on the bus with all the players and wives and support staff. And she's walking up and down the aisle, and they're celebrating the World Series. And she's yelling out, "We're number one." And she was holding up her thumb, not her finger. And we thought that was kind of funny, She probably didn't know a whole lot about the game and at that time, but when she first met my dad in 66 or 68, she probably had no choice but to learn about the game. But yeah, in terms of stories, I'll share one that I shared with at his funeral that speaks to the man that he was. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was a radio broadcaster for the Oakland A's back then. And he was just informed by Charleyfinley, the owner, that he would not be returning to the organization. And he was out of a job. And at the time, I think he was just a day or two away from having back surgery. And he made a point to say that Sal had called him and just expressed his disappointment and empathized with him in the current situation that he was in. And he just expressed appreciation for him looking out for not only his teammates, but others in the organization. He said it was a nice attribute of him as a captain. And that was really nice to hear. Really nice to hear.
All right. So Sal, let's go on to the next thing because this is something I love about baseball, how it goes with fathers and sons and things like that. You followed in your dad's footsteps in baseball. Explain what you're doing, your brothers and dad's influence on you as guys, because you said you didn't have any sisters, right? So now you have,
Correct.
so now you have a whole male family here, and baseball's in the blood. So go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, I have two brothers, Santino and Stefano, and for obvious reasons, we're all involved in the game in our own way. I am a baseball coach. I played in college and played a couple years of pro ball, and then got into coaching, and I was a head college coach for 11 years. And then after that, I got into high school coaching. I'm on my 12th year of high school coaching, and then I balanced that with youth travel baseball, and I'm on my 5th year doing that. So I coach a lot of ball up here in Wisconsin. We're indoors quite a bit. I just learned that we're supposed to get 3 to 5 inches of snow on Saturday, which is just depressing. But there's a lot of indoor facilities that have popped up in recent years, and that's where we spend a lot of our time from November to March. My brother Sonny is involved with a new team. They're entering their 2nd year in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, called the Lake Country Dockhounds. They play in the American Association, which is
what, Sal?
I think he froze.
He did just freeze.
Sal?
brother Stefano. He's a sports agent with a small firm in the Milwaukee area, and he's the baseball part of his team. And but his real niche is autograph signing. So he's hustling and all over the country doing autograph shows with a collection of former and current players in baseball, football, amongst other disciplines. So yeah, we he had a big influence on us, and we all have a love affair with the game and are involved in it in our own way.
All right, so my follow-up to that is, do all your siblings live in the greater Milwaukee area, or are they spread out?
Yeah, we all live west of the city, Wauwatosa, Delafield, and Waukesha right now.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you brought up another interesting point, which I think is really neat, that you heard stories both in Milwaukee and Oakland through outside sources, whether it's, a roommate or organization as service. But you say your dad never brought it home. Is that correct? And teammates and all that?
Yeah, when he came home, he just was a dad, and we play basketball in the driveway or have family dinners. We all played growing up, so we're always going to games together. Yeah, he didn't really bring, he tell a story on occasion, but to us he was just just a loving father. But one story I got to share that you, as Brewer fans, you'll appreciate, and we actually shared this at his celebration of life. Storm and gormanthomas told a story that one day in the clubhouse, I guess Gorman was a prankster, and one day in the clubhouse, he was always the first one in the clubhouse. And he put a small frog in my dad's cup, jock strap, and and then my father proceeded to get to the clubhouse when he did, and when he got dressed, he had no idea this frog was in there. And when he realized it, he went crazy, as did the frog, and he knew it was Gorman right away and chased him around the clubhouse for a good 20 minutes. and what I aside from it being a funny story, what I appreciate, was although he was a captain, he was a good teammate, and you don't pull a prank on the captain like that without being a good teammate. So.
Well, if anybody understands what a clubhouse is like, I got a real interesting thing that happened to me when I was covering the Fort Lauderdale Yankees at Fort Lauderdale Stadium. These guys at Fort Lauderdale, and at that time I was working with Stump Merrill. Obviously, a lot of people know who Stump Merrill is.
Mm-hmm.
So some of my guys here, I'm new just like they are. They're high class A, Florida State League, was a big one there. And some of these players had a lot of nerve. They sat there and took their hat, put it on my head with a bunch of shaving cream in there, and they'll do it. I felt like I was so embarrassed. It was unbelievable. But man, but what you got to remember, people know that when you're around guys for 140 to 162 games a year, it's a long time. You better build up a brotherhood or relationship. Otherwise, you're in deep trouble. Hey, you ever heard of a guy named Andy Liscano?
Any relation to Sixto Liscano?
No, no, not actually. But
No,
this guy,
I haven't.
well, no, it doesn't matter. He used to actually do the sportscast out in Milwaukee. Tom Pippins, is that his name? I don't even know.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did it on his network. No, Sixto Liscano. Andy moved around a little bit, but he was a sports announcer over the weekend. But it was Sixto Liscano. Yeah, I think a lot of us can definitely say he definitely heard of him. I love that story about the frog. I guess my shaving cream act will never compare to a frog, but it's great that you brought it on here. So, all right, let's talk about your dad even more. Why not? Two teams. First of all, your dad's, I believe, in the Wall of Honor for the Milwaukee Brewers and the Oakland A's Hall of Fame. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we were just this past August. He was unable to go to his induction in Oakland. And my mom would not leave his side. So my brothers and I went to represent him, and we took our kids. So his 5 grandchildren and his 3 sons, went down to Oakland, and they treated us unbelievably well. It was really a special weekend that his grandkids will never forget. And it was just a really fun weekend. Met a lot of his former teammates. My kid, I have 2 daughters. It's funny growing up in a family of boys. Just on a side note, I was convinced that I was going to have a left-handed hitting shortstop, and I was going to have a son. And then out popped my beautiful daughter Mia, who's 21 now, and I became a volleyball dad and a basketball dad, and coached both my girls. And I come to find out, of course, after they're done playing, that they hated basketball.
Wow.
I wish I'd known that at the time, but yeah. So his grandkids all went, and it was just an unbelievable weekend that they'll never forget. And I can't rave enough at how first class the Oakland A's were, and how they treated all of us. And their Hall of Fame is kind of a cool thing. I mean, my kids have met Reggie Jackson and Vidablue and Rickeyhenderson, and it was pretty cool. And of course, I idolize those guys. So, I try to act normal, but it was cool being in a room with them. Joerudi was there. Rayfosse's family was there. And they guys like Rudy and Fosse, very close, with my dad and my mom back in the day. So it was nice to reconnect with them. And he came to Milwaukee in 77, and I believe he was the Brewers' first free agent. So I didn't know it at the time. I was just a young boy. But I they say it was a big deal, and it opened the door and paved the way for other free agents to come to Milwaukee. And I think it all came together in, 1980, 1981, when they turned that corner. And I think they had their first successful season. Bambi's Bombers, which later turned into Harvey's Wallbangers in 1982, which I was 12 years old. So I was at the peak of fandom in that team. It's the greatest Brewers team to this date. I thought the one a few years ago where we lost to the Cardinals in Game 7, I thought that was going to be the team. That was an unbelievable time for Brewer fans. And but 82, I can name every guy on that team, I think, and it was just a special season. And my dad retired in 81. What most people didn't realize, though, is that he was in the dugout helping Harvey Keene, the manager, in 82. I think he kind of served as a bench coach, maybe before they had bench coaches.
Right, exactly. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
It's funny, I was talking about memories, and again, speaking of who he was, I have a vivid memory of going to spring training as a kid, and this would have been when the Brewers were in Sun City. I remember all the retired folks driving around in golf carts on the city streets, and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. But I remember being at the team hotel, and we were out there playing baseball and catch and what have you with some of the other players' kids, like the Haney boys and Larry Heisel Jr., among others. And my dad came back to the team hotel after a long day in the sun, a spring training game. And I remember him throwing all of us kids balls, like playing 500 until it got dark. And I just remember beaming in pride, and I remember feeling very grateful for him doing that. And it's moments like that stand out. Not the big home run. It's small. It's tidbits like that. I will say, though, in 1981, the year he retired, that was the year of the strike. I was 11 years old, and I was in grade school, and the Brewers were in the playoffs against the New York Yankees.
Right.
And they had some of my favorites, Reggie, Dave Winfield. They were a really good team. Catfish Hunter was pitching for them, also a former teammate. And I remember in grade school, they rolled in the TV on the cart with wheels, and we watched the Brewer game. We watched the playoff game. And in 81, that was the last year of his career. He didn't play a whole lot, but I would say towards the end of the season, they started using him more, and then he was an everyday player and starter in the playoffs, largely due to his experience, I'm sure. And I remember watching on TV as an 11-year-old, and I think he hit 2 doubles against the Yankees in a playoff game. And that was that. I think that was the first time where I really was just like, oh my God, that's my dad. And it was a cool moment. And then I will also never forget, at 11 years old, my mom taking me to New York City for that series. And I was able to watch him play in his last game. And that was my one and only time at Yankee Stadium. And it was something I'll always cherish.
Yeah, I've been in the Yankee Stadium once against the Tampa Bay Rays. Bought a ticket. It was worth it. I do want to mention a couple of players, though, that came to mind. It's funny how you mention them. I had an opportunity to interview Rayfosse a few years ago. Candy was there with me. Rayfosse is one of the finest people you'll ever meet, for sure. I mean, this guy is unbelievable. I know rolliefingers played for the Brewers and the A's, and you won't see guys like him ever again because they had 2, 3, 4 inning saves. Nowadays, you're lucky to get an inning out of them. And I think there's an asterisk. I can't say asterisk because of specialization, but the days of 2, 3, 4 inning saves, with the exception of maybe Josh Hader getting 2, are long gone, as Ernie Harwell would say. But what's interesting about all of this, though, is when I put it all into play. You are right. Okay, number one, they didn't have the bench coach title, but your dad appeared to actually go ahead and probably was an unofficial bench coach, if that makes any sense at all.
Mhm.
And I think that's pretty interesting how now you actually have one, but before you really didn't. So, with that said, was there ever a time when your dad, with you now coaching and all that, offered to give you advice on how to go ahead and provide some leadership for your players?
Oh yeah. I mean, I was just talking with my mom this week about it. That's one thing that I'm going to miss this season is ever since I started playing in college, I called him after every game, and calls turned into texts, but it was either a phone call or a text, and he always wanted to know, number one, how I did, and number two, how the team that I coached did. And that's something, my mom's like, well, you can call me. And I'm like, I will, but, to call him and bounce ideas off of him and vent, about not driving in a run from third with one out, those were conversations I'll miss. But I always looked to him for guidance, and would bounce things off of him. How do you handle this situation? And, how do you handle that situation? It was his knowledge was invaluable, and it helped me. And as a young college coach, another memory that I just cherish is I was 28 when the University of Wisconsin Parkside hired me, and I was there for 4 years. And what I'll never forget is, after a day at work or at practice, I'd go over to County Stadium, and I would sit in his box, and I'd have my hot dog and my peanuts, and I'd watch the ball game and just be a fly on the wall while, he sat above me in his box and watched the game himself. But then, guys would come in and out of the box, and then they would talk. They would talk business, the business of baseball, and they would talk about the game, and be guys like Cecilcooper and Bruce Mano and Fred Stanley. And man, to be a fly on the wall in those moments and take in and learn what I did as a young coach was awesome. Something that I'll never forget and will always appreciate.
All right, I have two questions before I turn it over to everybody. If you don't mind me asking, what was your dad's cause of death? What happened to him, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, he had a severe stroke in late April last year, and it was a severe stroke, and because of that stroke, we were unable to treat his cancer. So, and he was diagnosed 5 years ago with prostate cancer.
Wow.
And post-stroke, it rapidly grew.
Yeah.
And took him.
Okay. Well, I just was curious, put it out there. One other question. I'm turning over to everybody a little bit more of an upbeat note on this one, though. Sal, we appreciate you saying that. All right, let's talk about what you're currently doing now. You said you've done high school baseball, travel baseball, and now you coach University of Wisconsin at Parkside, Kenosha, and also at High Point University. So when we talk about what Sal Bando Jr. is now, why don't you give me an overview of all these particular stops? Which one was more rewarding than the other, or was any of them more rewarding than the other, or were they all good? I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of the floor is open to you, Mr. Bando Jr. You got an opportunity to plug those three. Go ahead. I'll keep quiet for a moment. Even though if I keep quiet about 2 minutes, that's longer than I'm usually able to.
Yeah. So I was, when I got done playing, I was out of baseball for a little while, and then the opportunity came up at Wisconsin Parkside. And at the time, it was a part-time job. They did not have any paid assistant coaches. And they only had one direction to go, and that was up. So I was the opportunity. It really intrigued me, and when I took the job, we had a lot of success, and I attribute to the kids that we brought in, and we basically went from worst to first in 4 years, and it was a great run, and I still have relationships with some of those kids that I coach, and they're not kids anymore. They're dads with their own kids now. And ironically, I bump into them now on the travel ball circuit. They're coaching their kids, and I'm coaching littles, and it's a trip. So from there, then I went down to North Carolina to High Point University. It was they were new to the NCAA Division I level, and my goal was to get back to the College World Series as a coach. I was fortunate enough to get there as a player, and going to a small D1 in a warm weather climate was that next step. And I was there 7 years, and that was an eye opener. It was tough. To give you an example, here in Wisconsin, there's only one Division I program in baseball, and that's the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Wisconsin Parkside's the state's only NCAA Division II program. Well, down in Carolina, High Point was one of 17 Division I programs.
Wow.
So it was brutal, man. Recruiting was tough. North Carolina, NC State, East Carolina, they got who they wanted. And then everybody else competed for other kids. So that naturally pushed us out of state. And, we recruited and did the best we could. And then a new athletic director came in 2008 and basically brought in all of his own people. And I was dealing with some burnout issues at that time. So I got out of baseball, moved home. I went down there with my wife at the time, and she was pregnant with my oldest. And then we moved back here with both my girls. And I was out of baseball for maybe a year and realized how miserable I was. So then the opportunity to coach at my high school, Marquette University High School, where my brothers and I went, that job opened up, and I jumped on it. And that would have been 2011. And this will be my 12th year at Marquette High School. And then to address, and I love it. I love coaching high school ball. It's very different, but it's a great program and a great high school. And the only problem is it's only 2.5 months out of the year. So that's what drew me to travel baseball. It was an opportunity to coach year round and do what I love. And so I started at Prospect Training Academy in Franklin about 4.5 years ago. And I do that year round in addition to the high school gig in the spring.
All right. Well, Candy's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin Whitewater, just so you know. So she is familiar with that education system. One thing that came to mind as you were mentioning those things. All right. Yeah. Obviously, know of the Major League Baseball thing being around your dad in college. You have which level do you like better, MLB or college? Because the thing I've really never cared about with college is the aluminum bats, and I tend to wonder whether the aluminum bats make it more difficult to transition into wooden bats as you go into the professional Major League level. And by the way, Ralph Williams, how you doing, my friend? So compare and contrast college as well with professional / Major League Baseball. I would. That's why it's hard for me to watch a college baseball game, because the aluminum bats remind me of putting cork in a wood bat.
Yeah, they're definitely a weapon of mass destruction. They've really made aluminum bats today and in recent years, the changes they've put in place, they do perform more similar to wood bats now, with some of the restrictions they put on them and how they make them. But there's no question there's a transition, and players struggle with that transition. I struggle with the transition going from aluminum to wood.
Did you?
Yeah. So as a coach, we probably train and we always are encouraging our hitters to use wood bats. They're definitely more true. The sweet spot's a little smaller. The weight distribution's a little bit different. It's a great tool for young hitters. So I'd always encourage them to use wood bats, and I tell the same thing to 13 and 14-year-olds as well.
All right. Well, this is a time where I turn everything over to my crew who's been patiently waiting for me. Thank you very much to all of y'all. But there are certain things that when you get on a roll, I want to stay one point. So I'm going to go right to left. George, what questions do you have for Sal?
Well, Sal, as evidenced by my hometown Detroit Tigers, the old saying, you can never have enough pitching. And but yet it's happening here in Detroit, and it's happening in other cities as well, where these young pitchers, their arms, they get all kinds of injuries. Tigers, for example, have had top draft choices the last 3 years going out already with Tommy John injuries. Sal, can you talk about this? And are we putting too much stress on these kids in high school and college, especially the pitchers?
Yeah, that's you brought up a really good point. It's definitely a hot topic in the game. In a collection of people much smarter than me put together what they call pitch smart guidelines for youth players and high school prep players, and it's really a good tool that most use. I know the WIAA, which is the association that kind of runs high school sports in Wisconsin, we have to follow the pitch smart guidelines, and they're designed to protect pitchers.
Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
All right.
Eric?
He froze.
Yes. Your
Sure.
dad, yep, your father became the Brewers general manager during the 90s. He
Did I lose everybody?
No, you're back.
Froze from
You're
the-
good. You're good. Thanks, Sal.
your dad sorry,
Go ahead, Eric.
But
Sorry.
It's okay.
I think he froze.
the arm injuries, it's safe. I remember my dad saying, I wish I lifted more weights towards the end of my career,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the weight training, it really didn't get popular in the game until the Oakland A's, the 80s blew up. And they had the Bash brothers. But prior to that, it wasn't really prevalent in the game. And as advantageous as strength training is in baseball, there's always that other side of the coin. These guys, they're so physical. It's easier to pull stuff and hurt something. And I think they're all kind of intertwined and related. But it's remarkable. Speaking of pitching, it's remarkable at all levels how far pitching has come. I mean, I think pitching is night and day ahead of hitting at every level. I mean, everybody's throwing harder. Guys in college throwing 100 miles per hour was unheard of 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And you're seeing mid-major Division I programs with 8-9 kids that are throwing over 90 miles per hour. That's unheard of. And MLB is no different. I mean, these bullpens, everybody's mid to high exploding sliders. You ask about what MLB players amaze me. They amaze me what they can do against the kind of pitching that they see. I love college sports. I love, when it comes to baseball, I love college just as much as I love the big leaguers. I'll tell you what I do love, though, is the World Baseball Classic. That was pretty awesome.
Well, it's funny how you say that, Sal, because I was at Wake Forest University a couple of years ago, and we had an opportunity to tour Wake Forest baseball, and they talked about the scientific aspects of baseball, including the pitching, the hitting, and stuff that I won't even get into. But when you talk about the scientific part, it just astonishes me. I just thought I'd bring that up. I want to turn over to Eric. Okay, I know, Eric, go ahead.
Yes, your father became the Brewers general manager during the 90s. What made him decide to hire a then inexperienced Philgarner, who obviously became, who was the Brewers' all-time leader in wins up until this past year with Craig Counsell?
Philgarner?
Yes.
They were teammates in Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
And his nickname was Scrap Iron. So yeah. I think his familiarity, I'm speaking, I'm just ballparking this. I don't know why he hired Phil. I know he was very excited at that hire. I think he respected Phil as a player and as a leader. He was kind of his nickname was Scrap Iron, and he was a dirtbag. And being called a dirtbag in baseball is a good thing. And quite frankly, as a coach, it's a philosophy that we try to teach and instill in the kids that I coach. We want them to be dirtbags, flying all over the field and doing whatever it takes to win. And I think that's the kind of guy that Philgarner was. Speaking of him, though, taking another side street here, he told a funny story when my dad passed. About they were together in Oakland, and my dad was just having a bad game. I think he popped up in the infield with runners in scoring position, struck out a couple times, and then in his last at bat, there were guys in scoring position again, and he struck out, and he came storming back to the dugout, and Garner's sitting next to the manager, and right where they were sitting in the Oakland dugout, like behind them and a couple steps down, was the dugout bathroom. Mm-hmm. And apparently Sal was upset with the strikeout, and threw his helmet into the helmet rack and went into the bathroom and slammed the door. And Garner tells the story where he says, there's going to be some damage, look out. And then all of a sudden there's silence, that they hear nothing in the dugout. And then the bathroom door opens up, and Sal comes walking out and sits next to Garner and starts laughing. And he looks at Phil and he goes, "I can't even hit a kitchen sink right now." Or no, a bathroom sink. I can't even hit a bathroom sink. So I think he swung and missed the sink. And it was just a funny moment that speaks to his humility.
All right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give Jeremy an opportunity to ask you a question. I know he's getting prepared for a big move over the weekend. So why don't you give him a real question? Then I'm going to go back to Eric. Go ahead, Jeremy, real quickly.
Jeremy, you're muted. We can't hear you.
George kind of touched on something earlier, and I know for a fact, because I used to help with little leagues myself, that they really don't teach the curve and the screwball as much through little league, through high school, because they don't want these kids tearing up their elbows, and they try to put them on these pitch counts. But in college, you don't see these pitch counts on them, because look at what Steven Strasburg did when he was coming out of college, and how he was pitching full games and everything else while they were in the College World Series. And I think that's where a lot of the stress on these young elbows come from, because you got these guys that in college that are moving the ball like the pros do, just not quite as fast. And I think that's where it comes in, because when we taught it when they were younger, there actually was less Tommy John injuries than there are now. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with it, because their muscles form not being able to make that rotation properly. What do you think about that, Sal?
I think there's some validity to that point. I'll be honest with you, when I see not 10, 11-year-olds spinning breaking balls, I cringe.
I'm not saying that young. I'm talking about they try to stray away from it even in high school now.
Yeah, it's wise. I wish it's something that we preach, and I think you could say this is across the board. At that young age, man, they should be fastball changeup only. And if at a young age you can learn a changeup and throw it with the same arm speed, it's going to be a tremendous pitch for them, but you don't see that.
Right. And if I remember right, the speed actually comes from the leg kick. It's not actually the arm speed, because if you don't have any movement through your hips and your knees and everything else to get that kick out there, you don't have speed on it, no matter how hard you throw your arm.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the science in the game, and there's a lot of it, but proper pitching and throwing mechanics and having everything work in sequence, is fascinating. It's something as coaches we all study to try to maximize, velocity and potential out of arms.
All right. Well, I'm going to sign off, guys.
No, that's okay. Well, safe travels, Jeremy. I'll be in touch, but I'm glad you had an opportunity to ask Sal a couple of questions. Good stuff and safe travels, all right? All right, so with that said,
Thanks meeting you, Sal.
Be safe, all right?
Yep, thank you.
All right, so with that said, Sal, what I'm going to go ahead and do is, Will Vogel has a question. I'm just going to allude to it for a moment. He says, hi, Mr. Bando. Thank you for answering my question. First off, did you ever get to meet any of your dad's teammates? And if so, did you have a favorite stadium that you saw your dad play in? That's interesting.
Yeah. I think seeing him end his career in Yankee Stadium was awesome, and it's something I'll never forget. I've met several of his teammates over the years. Guys like, you mentioned Raleigh and his teammates in Oakland that we've already spoke of, and then Brewers legends like Cooper, Yount, Molitor, Gorman, that whole '82 team. I mean, it was remarkable. I've got a really cool scrapbook that I put together when I was 12 years old in 1982 that covered the World Series, and I took all the articles from the Journal Sentinel, and then got the pictures autographed, and ticket stubs are in there. I mean, it's a great little keepsake and memento. I was into it that much at 12. But speaking of favorite stadiums, I'm too old to, be a part of that big Brewer Cubs rivalry. I think that was younger people. But Wrigley Field, I think, is the best. I love Wrigley Field, the history, the town, the smell. I think it's a special place. I've been to Fenway, and I am partial to Wrigley.
All right, so I want to go back to Eric real quick, and I'll leave Candy for last. Was there another question that you wanted to ask Sal at all, Eric?
Oh yes. You've seen the game change since your dad played a lot. Whether it be what are things you like that have changed, and what are things that you wish just were kept out of the game?
That's a good question. I don't know how I feel about this whole pitch clock thing. It's interesting. The metrics and the Moneyball, which was a phenomenal movie, and it's a great story. Mm-hmm. I hate to see organizations lean one way or the other, so strongly. I think, like anything in life, balance is important, and somewhere in the middle is the right answer. If you're all metrics, I don't know if it doesn't play in the postseason, because the postseason, for example, it's a whole different season, and what you did up to that point really doesn't mean a whole lot. It's a whole new season, and you got to win 3 or 4 games. So I think you can just kind of throw analytics out the window when it comes to the postseason. It still comes down to performance and performing under pressure and executing. There's nothing to measure there. It's just such a short window. But I do believe there's a place for it, and I think it's good. It's good for the game, but I just would hate to see 100% dependency on it. But the whole pitch clock thing, I wonder, because we go from the steroid era where fans loved offense, sure they want to shorten the games, but with the way these pitchers are, how hard they're throwing, and these specialized bullpens, I got to think, at some point there aren't going to be a whole lot of runs scored. And I was just telling somebody the other day this. I would not be surprised if they move the mound back. Because if they lose fans because every game is 3-2, as a baseball fan and as a purist, I love it. That's a very entertaining game. But the casual fan, they probably want to see doubles and home runs, and that's kind of how that was the whole steroid era. So I don't, it's interesting. Pitching being ahead of hitting. If it continues at this rate, and guys everybody has somebody that throws over 100. There's not going to be a whole lot of offense. It would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if they move the mound back, if they don't hesitate to take drastic measures like putting a pitch clock on a pitcher.
So you good, Eric?
Yes.
All right, Candy, we'll wrap it up with you. Obviously, what can I say? There's a bigger person with a history between her dad and us being there. Take it away, Candy. The floor is yours. Ask Sal whatever you want.
So, Sal Jr., your dad played third base. What position did you play?
I played the position where they put non-athletes. That would have been first base.
So you were a Cecil-cooper.
I did hit lefty. But, yeah, the position I played was hitter.
Okay. So a lot of us obviously didn't play or didn't have dads that played the game. And you talked about how your dad didn't bring it home much. How often were you at the games that he played in?
He retired in 81.
Right.
I remember going to a lot of games, and sitting in the family section. I remember the father-son games that the Brewers used to have.
Mm-hmm.
And the best part about that, wasn't so much the father-son game before the actual game.
Right.
It was the barbecue afterwards on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And eating brats and hot dogs, and then the kids playing on the actual field.
Yep.
While the parents kind of mingled. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. And then when he retired and started working in the front office, and as we got older, we were fortunate enough where we could take advantage of that, and we would go hit, on his lunch break, he would come down and throw BP to us in the batting cages down there. And that was awesome. I remember being going into my senior year. I went to Oklahoma State my senior year, and I was down there hitting, and Walt Riniak, I think it was the White Sox, Walt Riniak, the hitting coach with the White Sox, and he was working with Joey Cora. And I just took a step back, and Riniak was talking to me, and I was like, oh my God. And learned whatever I could, from that moment. And
yeah, that's unbelievable.
And then years later, and they are talking about Charlie Lau and Walt Riniak, and it was just kind of all came full circle, and it was a blessing. It was a blessing. But to answer your question, yeah, we were around County Stadium, and yeah, County Stadium quite a bit, and I loved Old County Stadium.
Well, if you were covering football, you wouldn't. That was hard. I had to go back to Lambeau, and I will tell you, Charlie Lau, I know, was one of the best hitting coaches of all time for sure. In addition to Walt Riniak, let me tell you one thing about baseball. I actually played a catcher, and I enjoyed the position because I got on the umpire's nerves, and I sat there and talked to the hitter to distract them. I played every mind game behind there, took every foul ball in places you wouldn't even want to mention. If it's a family rated show, you don't want to do that. And it was a thinking man's. I would warm up my pitchers. That was the right position for me. I always refer back to, and I'll give Candy another opportunity to ask another question or so. But with me, the way I've always done things is, everybody knows a Timex takes a licking and keep on taking. I've been taking a licking and keep on talking. So that's how it usually works with me. But all right, Katie, go ahead. I'm sure you have probably a couple more questions you want to get out there. Go ahead.
So you talk about you went to Yankee Stadium with your dad. Did you travel at all to other cities with your dad while he was playing?
While he was playing, prior to that, I'm sure we did. I just don't remember it. Before he became general manager, he was a special assistant to Harry Dalton, and he would go to all the minor league teams, and those were trips that he would always take myself or one of my brothers. So, man, I'll never forget going to El Paso and watching the AA Diablos play, and was it Billy Joe Robido? I think he was with the Brewers for a while. Joey Meyer, Glenn Braggs. I mean, those guys were all AA players back then. And the coolest thing about El Paso, I'd be shocked if they're still not doing it today. But whenever a player hit a home run, after they crossed home plate, they would take their helmet and run alongside the where the fans sit, the seats, and people would put money in their helmets. I don't never see that before. I was like, oh my God. And they would say, you hit a game-winning home run or it's a huge home run. I mean, these guys are collecting thousands, from fans. It was a crazy little tradition that I'm sure they still do, but I have no idea. But yeah, he would take us to that. I remember as a family going to Fenway, and we went to a Red Sox Brewers game. A funny story from that. I think this was it must have been when he was a general manager. So we did like a family trip. And so our seats were super nice. They're like right by the Brewers dugout. And, I didn't think anything of it, or I didn't realize what was going on, but Cirillo comes out of the dugout and he's got the wrong jersey on. Like he's wearing the wrong jersey. Like he's wearing the wrong jersey than everybody's wearing. And I'm like, Jeff, jersey. And he's like, when he realized it, he's like, oh my God, thank God. He points to me, goes back in the dugout. And then one of the players, I forget who, comes walking up to the screen and he's like, we're going to fine you in kangaroo court. They were playing a prank on him. And I didn't even think of that. I'm like, that's our third baseman. He's got the wrong jersey on, Yeah, I thought that was funny.
Wow, that's so cool. Do you associate with any of the kids that were also sons of former players? Like, did you hang around other kids of players?
I'm still friends with Larry Heisel Jr.
Okay.
He lives in town here. His son was in our academy one year, so it was great to see him on a regular basis that year. We check in with one another from time to time, via text and an occasional lunch. But Larry would probably be the only one, that I stay in touch with. I grew up with the Hegan boys, Mike Hegan's kids, Sean and JJ. They lived very close. We used to play sandlot baseball together every chance we got, growing up. But I haven't heard from them, and I got off Facebook a few years ago. So Facebook was one way to stay in touch with people from your past, and
yes,
now I'm not on it anymore. So
anything else, Candy?
I mean, there's so many questions I could ask, but
It's all right. It's what we're here for.
Let's remind everybody that when your dad played for the Brewers, they were part of the American League, whereas now they're part of the National League. So they didn't play like the Cubs and stuff like that. So going to Wrigley Field, did you do that after or did you?
Yeah, it was, high school, college, post-college, bleachers, having fun in Wrigleyville. That was my experience.
Nice.
Well, you know what? While she's thinking another question, you brought up the El Paso Diablos. You remember Rick Parr and Bob Paul?
No.
All right. Well, it may have been in the 80s. It may have been a little bit later or 90s. But the reason why I mentioned those names up there is I went to a baseball seminar a couple of times and learned about sales techniques, is what I did. And, then I eventually covered the Sun Bowl. But what makes El Paso such an interesting area is I've never heard of fajita before. And I ate my first fajita out in El Paso, Texas. And Rick Parr says to me, "You've never heard of a fajita?" I said, "No, I haven't heard of that." So he said, "We have the best fajitas. I want to take you to have a couple of fajitas." And those guys
Probably love them
actually,
now.
well, they're not bad when I get to Mexican, that's for sure. I never heard of them until I ended up going there. But Rick, but again, baseball is such a small world. And I remember going there for a baseball seminar, which I used all the marketing techniques in every aspect of sales. But Rick Parr and I believe Richard Paul or Bob Paul, it was a Paul. It was a great time. A lot of people don't realize that I enjoyed going to wars every once in a while to negotiate some deals in Mexico. Now it wouldn't be safe to go there. But El Paso is a very fascinating city. And when you talked about the Diablos being there a while, you certainly struck a chord. So I just want to get that out there. Any other questions or two, Candy, before we wrap it up?
I do have one question that I was thinking of. There are a lot of iconic broadcasters in baseball. And one that comes to mind obviously has to be Bob Uecker for the Brewers. Have you met him? Do you have an interesting story about him?
I don't. I have met him, and he's a great guy. He's exactly how you would imagine him to be. He's he's just very, very genuine, and he's a great guy. I got nothing but fond things to say about him. I'm not going to pretend to act like I know him well, but he knew us as Sal's kids and was always would always say hello whenever we were in his presence. So yeah, he was awesome. He's a legend.
Nice.
Nothing like a summer night listening to him.
Another guy who's a legend out there, believe it or not, is a guy by the name of Tom Skybosh. Remember him?
Mm-hmm.
He's a PR guy. Tommy's, man, this show could go on forever. I'm glad you're hanging in there with us because I'm sure this is rekindling some memories. But I'll never forget the time when the Brewers trained in Chandler, and Sky gave me a credential for the whole time. I wanted to take a ride over to Yuma, and I'll never forget. Bob said, Tommy said, "You don't have to do that. I can credential you for a Padres game. I need to take this trip. I want to see all the parts I can." So then I get back to the stadium out there, I think Compadre Stadium at the time, because after Sun City, which I consider Cocoon, the West Coast version of it, if people know what Cocoon is, they'll understand. And I ended up getting a speeding ticket that cost me over $100 and some back then in town. I told him about it, and he said, don't even tell you. You told me so. You're right, but I had to do it. And what was worse about it was I only got the darn ticket with 15 minutes to go on I-10. That's the part that really killed me. If you would have done it midway through, I could deal with it, but not near the finish line. Seriously. But Tommy was an iconic, PR guy, and I know he recently passed away. I think it was not this past December 25th, but the before. But I had a chance to talk to Tommy. Great to work with him, and I know that your dad, Tommy's been there forever. I think he worked with your dad a little too, if I remember right.
Yeah, they did for sure.
Yeah. So, all right, Katie, anything else you want before I call it a night?
So one last question. So Sal, I'm just a little bit older than you, not much, just a little bit older than you. We actually moved back to Wisconsin when I was a year and a half, and that was in 1970. So I remember the Brewers. I loved going to Brewer games. I mean, I was part of the Pepsi Brewer fan club where you'd get tickets. And I remember back in the day when I participated in a long ball hitting contest, and I actually was one of the finalists. And as a finalist, you got to go stand on the field and actually hit the ball on the field. And so that was like the cat's meow for me. It was the greatest. Your dad always had this infectious smile that I remember and stuff like that. what is one last thing you would want us to remember about your dad in honor of your dad? And I want to thank you for being on this and allowing me to ask you questions because I love this hour, just so you know.
Oh,
So we're
oh,
stretching
yeah.
you, Sal. We're stretching you a little. Didn't I tell you before that we would have a good time? Am I a man of my word?
Yeah. No, yeah,
right.
we're good. My daughter just snuck out. She doesn't have school tomorrow, so she's on her way to a sleepover, and so I'm just chilling. What I get, that's thank you for asking me that question.
Of course.
Sal was a humble man. He was a family man, and he really was a simple man. Some might think that he was antisocial, but he really wasn't. He would never turn down anybody that asked for an autograph. If somebody stopped him, he would always chat with them, and he genuinely loved people and were interested in others. But he was a simple man in that, his life centered around his faith. He was a strong believer and a strong Christian and family. He was a family man, and he was happiest when he was around his family. And he was a humble man. So he's somebody that, my brothers and I idolized, and we miss him dearly. My mom and him were married for 54 years. They had a hell of a run, and she's getting a little stronger, with each day, but it's still pretty fresh. But, people say you move on with time, and I don't prescribe to that. I don't think you ever move on when somebody touches your heart the way he did. I think you carry on because you have to, but you really don't move on. And that's kind of where we're all at. The Brewers are gracious enough to have invited us to a ball game this summer, and I think the grandkids are going to throw out the first pitch, and
nice.
We're all going to be together. And it's whenever we're together, we think of him because growing up in an Italian household, Sunday dinners is what you do. So he was just a family man, and he was a man of faith, and he was a good man.
Well, let me tell you this. I'm thankful for LinkedIn that you and I got in contact, number one, Sal. So for all you people out there that are professionals, you better realize LinkedIn does some pretty good things. And by the way, this show is actually being broadcast live on LinkedIn too. Number two, I'm going to make a decision right now to let people know I am dedicating this broadcast to Sal Bando Sr. and Fred Ebling as well. And to me, I think they're both. Fred Ebling, my father-in-law, passed away on February 5th at the age of 80. So Candy feels your pain. So we're dedicating it to both. Okay. And I'm going to tell you one thing. The Bandos, to me, I've always respected you guys an awful lot. But I'm going to tell you one thing. Sal Bando Sr.'s legacy in the eyes of a lot of people should be out there, that he created a Hall of Fame family. And you can take 10 exclamation points. You don't need white on it nowadays. I think they use a keyboard called a computer, and smileys and all that emoji business that I know very little about, anyways. But so I'm going to make it a point to dedicate this show to Sal Bando Sr. and Fred Ebling, and of course Sal Bando Jr. To me, what can I say? I believe. To me, we created a good friendship, and I'm glad that we've had an opportunity so you could tell your dad's story on behalf of your family, because 3 males, doing their own thing, an incredible wife, and your dad, it as in the eyes of Dick Vitale, and yes, I still have some voice left. Awesome, baby. All right, there you go. There's your Dick Vitale reference. So
thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much for coming
Thank you.
on here tonight. But before we let you go, I want let everybody know they get hold of us, and Candy will take us down the stretch here, with all the ways to identify us as a network. So hang in there, Sal. Candy's going to take us home.
So if you would like this program or any others, please subscribe to the South Florida YouTube channel. You can hit the red subscribe button, share any of our broadcasts. We talk a lot of different sports. We talk, obviously, this Fire Up Wisconsin, but we have Fire Up Florida, Fire Up Michigan. We have Inside the Pigskin. We have 108 Stitches baseball talk. We have No Limits. We have Sports Exchange. We have lots of different shows. We also have the audio version of our shows can also be heard on iHeartRadio, Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcast. If you want to be a guest on the show, send us some questions, send us some ideas, www.southfloridatribune@gmail.com. Go to our website, check us out. We have pictures on there. We have all kinds of stories. Scott writes, George writes, www.southfloridatribune.com. Check out Scott at Twitter @Tribune South. And if you want to advertise or sponsor our show, call Scott at 954-304-4941. Okay, Mr. Sal, is there any way you want anybody, if they want to contact you, how can they contact you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That works.
Okay, perfect.
I accept
Hey,
any
that's how I found
invitation.
you, buddy. That's how I found you, man. It worked out pretty good, didn't it?
Yeah.
Perfect,
Okay.
perfect.
Go ahead, Katie.
George, how can anybody get a hold of you?
I'm available at gicorn@yahoo.com. You can find me at the Motor City Tribune under the South Florida Tribune banner. I've got a book called Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air, and there's a link at the end of my columns if you'd like to obtain a copy of the book. And also you can reach me at Twitter at SandGSports99. And I'm also heard on 108 Stitches and Fire Up Michigan, other shows on this wonderful network. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being on, Sal.
Well, go ahead and pull the book out so the guy can see it and let him know who's in it with you. Come on, you're leaving the best part out, Icor. What, you losing it this late at night or what?
Yeah, the Detroit Sports Broadcasters on the Air. You won't find Bob Uecker in here, but you will find Scott Morganroth with Muhammad Ali and Jimmy Connor, some great stars among many this man has interviewed over his 42-year career that I've known him.
43.
Nice.
43.
You really need the extra year, Scott. You really need the extra year.
No, I don't care at this point. I'm past that point. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Eric.
Okay. You can follow me on my Twitter at Sports Team News, or you can find me on my blog at bellyupsports.com, where I am writing about all things baseball and also whatever program Scott feels like putting me on. And also read George's book. It's wonderful. You'll find Scott in there. You'll find Ernie Hartwell in there. It's a wonderful book. You get to see a young Scott Morganroth with brown hair.
Knew that part was coming out.
Back before they had podcasts.
Way back. All right, Candy, take us home.
Scott, don't feel bad. This is literally, I've never heard a podcast, so this is like my first podcast.
Can I tell you something, Sal? I don't even call them a podcast. I call them a broadcast. Sorry. This is one old dog you can't trade a new trick. So if all you newbies and new media want to call it podcast, fine. But I'm going to go ahead and say broadcast until I can't talk anymore. And it is what it is. This podcasting business is what it is. But you know what? I'm glad that you had your first one with me, at least anyways. When people start seeing you with your first act, which went a little longer than I anticipated, but how can you, when you have an opportunity to talk stories, man, it don't get any better than this.
I mean,
I'm probably the most long-winded guest host you'll ever deal with. But then again, I'll let you, if you never contact me again because you don't like me, I'll know you didn't like it. And if you do, then I'll be looking you up when I get up to Wisconsin. And I hope the second part's more applicable than the first.
Scott, you can just come to my house.
Huh?
You can just come to my house. I'll let you in.
No, I'm talking about Sal. I don't mind yours. Don't worry, Sal. When we get up there, we're going to get together and get a bite to eat out there. How's that sound, man?
Yes, and I'm buying.
You are? Okay,
You are.
man. That's
and Eric, if I bump into you, I'm buying you a beer.
Goody. I love
I'll
beer.
drink one for you, man. But I'll tell you, the rest of the Ebling family is looking forward to meeting you too. We told them about it, so you're going to meet them all, and we're going to be talking until our hearts content. So,
Sounds
all right,
wonderful.
Candy, let everybody know everything you do for this thing, and then we'll call it a night.
I don't do anything. I just help put up all the broadcasts. I do the website. I created the video. I don't know what else. You get the guests. You talk. I do the rest.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, I'll close it out by saying this. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this edition of Fire Up Wisconsin, and in the eyes of Will Vogel. Okay, and this is definitely worth putting on the screen. Will, he's active with us too. Mr. Bando, you are a Hall of Fame guest. You know, I guess I could just say ditto. All right. So with that said, look at the reaction. Look who you're bringing up here, my man. It is what it is. But all right. But so meanwhile, this concludes this edition of Fire Up Wisconsin. So on behalf of Candy Ebling, Eric Katz, George Eichhorn, Sal Bando Jr., and Jeremy Ballwright, we appreciate you joining us. Candy, take it home with the promotional video at the end to let them know what we do and how often we do it. Go ahead.
Here we go.